It's a real privilege and a delight to be able to feature work by Bokani in this current Side Chapel Series exhibition for Advent, Christmas, and through into Epiphany. And so I'm really grateful to Bokani for creating this work, for all that takes place in and around that vocation, being an artist and what it means. And Bakani, please do share whatever you would like to about yourself and introduce yourself.
Thanks so much. My name is Bokani. I am Zimbabwean-born artist. I'm based in London. I mostly work um, in this abstract painting realm, but I think of myself as a multidisciplinary artist. So conceptual work, computational work, and these painted glass works as well. So I'm really, really thrilled to be sharing these with everyone who'll be visiting St. James this Christmas.
When you were first asked to take part in this, what did you think about it? You and I think our first conversation together in a context like this was for an organization called Art and Christianity, where because you were
Mm,
showing work at the Conversations show in Liverpool in the Walker Art Gallery, there was an opportunity for an online public conversation. And I remember just being really inspired by the kind of work that you make and also by the way that you choose to express meaning in relation to it. So when we first started talking about your work and this context of St. James's Piccadilly, what did you make of that? What did you think?
I think it's such an important church within the context of being in London, in the context of making art in London, just because of where the church sits. And I think that's a really important context. So often I think about how unlikely it is that somebody from my background heritage might end up where I am today. And I think that was one of the first things that I was thinking about, that faith has a way of bringing people together in really unexpected ways. Um, a lot of the time when I'm offered an opportunity to make work or to plan ahead uh, for a particular exhibition, I always want to talk about experiences of women, Black women especially, um, and to use sort of any platform that I have to sort of shed some light. And I think that was the case with the exhibition in Liverpool. It's been the case whenever I've had any opportunities to show institutionally or on billboards in London. And so I think that was my first thinking around, okay, who might I think about in in sharing work, and how might that reflect? And we'd spoken about women, their liberatory practices. So I've been reading a bit of Dolores Williams, for example,
Mm.
um, and I just, yeah, very quickly came to the Visitation. I'd been thinking about the Magnificat, and yeah, this idea that, God hears the cry of an oppressed people and then sort of invites these incredible women to participate in what will be liberation for their people, and for themselves. And also then to think about what does it mean to say yes to that, to say yes to a new life, um, and that new life not necessarily being something that's easier, but something that's certainly beautiful. And part of the reason that I started painting on mirrors and working with glass is that I really didn't want people to sort of project necessarily um, a view onto my work, but I wanted to remind them that we're part of the same picture. Yeah, I didn't want people to hide away from any complicity we have in how we treat each other. And so I really, yeah, those were a few of the rambling thoughts.
No, no, thank
Um,
you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the two images on screen right now. One of them is a very kind of close in
Mm,
image of these two mirror works, and then you can see the wider context with both of them behind the altar. Effectively, it's like a diptych, a two-part
mm,
painted
mm.
mirror altarpiece, and I was very moved when they arrived.
Yes.
And the altar in the side chapel, of course, it also has a frontal which changes with the seasons. So that's that bright purple, which is there for Advent. Purple is that Advent color for us. And then the other figure that you can see just there is by a completely different artist called Clinton Challoner. And he carved a whole nativity set out of a
Mm.
tree called, it's a catalpa tree, an Indian bean tree, which was in the courtyard at St. James's for nearly a century,
Oh,
and
wow.
it endured. You can just see, I think, on Mary's neck there,
Hmm. Hmm.
that there are burn marks, and there's
Mm.
also an iron cuff around the back of one of the other figures in this set, because the tree, it lived through the bomb damage in 1940 and the Second World
Wow.
War, and became such an old tree that it just basically it died. And then instead of just
Mm.
throwing away that material or giving it over to the wood chipper or whatever we could have done, the church in 2010 decided that it would be quite powerful to almost free these divine figures from the tree and then commission this artist to
Mm.
do this. And so normally these figures would not be in the side chapel or in St. James's at all, except for this season. And so
Hmm.
I wonder what it's like for you as an artist in this place and at this time to be working in your practice where your vision of Mary and Elizabeth and Jesus and John the Baptist and reflection that we cannot and that we must not um, avoid or negate the reality of our own selves in all of our complicity and also in all of our God-given holiness. I wonder what
Mm.
it's like to interact with this space in particular. It's not a white cube gallery, it's not a museum.
Mm.
It's a space where we use this space for prayer and for the Eucharist numerous times during the week. And then you've also got this other artist's stuff, which is based
Mm.
on a tree in the courtyard to kind of contend with. It creates a conversation that in this space we've never had before at St. James's. So, what do you think about being in this sacred place, in a chapel, in a church, and also having this work in contact with this nativity set made out of this tree, where it also, I believe, changes the nativity set. It completely
Mm.
changes the way that it's possible to
Mm.
view this wooden sculpture through your glass creations. What do you
Hmm.
think?
Hmm. I think one of the really special things about art in sacred spaces is that it's not curated in this way that where the art becomes like almost a scientific object. I think that's what like a white cube does to
Mm,
art and artifacts in that way. And so I'm so thrilled by the fullness of my work in a space that is alive with prayer, that is alive with conversation. And that conversation isn't a sort of one way.
mhm,
It's a way of adding my prayer to a space. Part of the reason that I don't paint on like transparent glass necessarily is because I quite like the idea that the light in that particular side chapel, I was so taken by that window um, that filters this beautiful light throughout the day um, onto that altar, and how the mirror works sort of reflect at very specific times. And so you really have to be present and in the moment. So it's quite an ephemeral effect um, that where they reflect back this light. And so for me, that's my way of interacting with nature and my way of recognizing that there are times and there are seasons. And we don't always control that. And I think what I find so beautiful about the nativity scene being from a tree is a sense of what that tree has witnessed. I like to think that my mirror paintings, especially, also are witnessing scenes, and over time, sort of buried into these works will be a history, and sort of images that have, in the same way that light has passed through them, will be embedded in these artworks. And so, yeah, there's a real sense of communion, which relates so beautifully to how I envisage, and in imaginative contemplation, think about that visitation scene of Elizabeth meeting Mary and, in a way, Jesus and John, and that sense of a coming together that is really profound. I think so much of art in sacred spaces as holding conversations that are um, immune to time,
Mm.
and immune to, I don't know, our specific iteration and generation, um, but rather hold that eternalness of the love that we experience, and that eternalness that we experience in God's presence too. So it's an enormous, enormous privilege whenever I can share work in this context, and particularly because it is a church that is still a church. I've shown before in a chapel that had been deconsecrated, and yeah, it feels really important and special, to be sharing work at this time.
People have had profound responses to this work. A lot of it, neither you nor I, if we're not in church, and if the conversation
Mm,
happen, we will never know how these
mm,
impact people. But one of the most powerful conversations I've had is with a visitor who noticed that there is a connection, which is both mysterious and also really quite vivid, between these two works as the altarpiece that you've created
mm,
and the smaller works of art, the mirrors, which you've
mm,
placed around the periphery of the church as a whole. And at this
mm,
time of year, we often have candlelit services. So there are
mm,
flickering candles in reds and in white yellow glow. And
mm,
it completely, you were talking about time of day, quality of light. Sometimes they shimmer.
mm, mhm,
Both of these images were taken in mid-afternoon light, but it
mhm,
completely changes when these images and their reflective capacity almost like pass through the thresholds of different hours throughout the day. And so the
mm,
weaving together of time and eternity, and in the case of the images on the right, notions of power and
mm,
whose power and how divine power, community power, and the critique, I hope, at least in me, the first time I held these, I unwrapped them as an entire package. There were a number of them,
mm,
and I spread them out all over the desk. And
mm.
I wept because
Oh,
I didn't know what the text would be until it appeared.
mm, mm,
And often I think that that's kind of what happens in just being a human being over the course of the day, that the unexpected will catch us and hold us in a way which can be steadfast as well as precarious. And
mm,
then there are these round mirrors as well, which have these beautiful forms, which are hugely evocative and can be many different things at once. So
mm.
I'm wondering about, with these smaller works, how they relate to your practice and to the work of St. James's overall. And the
Sure.
text for the image on the right, that text, tell me about it. Talk me through your discernment about those words and the space of that mirror, and how it works and how it might open up new conversations at St. James's and beyond.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the ones with the text because they were older, and I recently had a wonderful opportunity to share my work in a way that I sort of hadn't necessarily like planned for until this year, which was to gift the first 10 years of my work. And so I invited members of my community, people that walked in off the street of this gallery, um, refugees, friends of friends of friends, to come into my studio, gallery, and an exhibition space at a refugee center and choose whatever work spoke to them. And so I wanted to continue that project of gifting in some way with this commission too. I think so often we think about Christmas and we think about gifts. And I had begun thinking a little bit about, the Magi and how they represent a particular type of power. And in the Magnificat, we hear again about how God has heard the powerless. Um, and I was thinking about this Frederick Douglass quote that power concedes nothing without demand. And
So this is a
um,
quote from the American 19th century abolitionist Frederick Douglass.
that's right.
That is powerful. Yeah, yeah. It's just for people
And
listening who might not necessarily know who that person is. It's great to
good
understand
point.
that context.
Thank you.
It's
Um,
astonishing to imagine that, but it certainly is possible. A little bit like Dolores
and
Huggins earlier, I was like, yes, the American Black liberation 20th century theologian. And so it's so amazing to me too that people will have held this in their hands. And I didn't say much about it when I shared it with the congregation, with the
I was
community
so
here. I
moved by
wanted them
that.
to claim those words in whatever way kind of resonated with them.
Yes.
And people were just like really quite, some of them were really quite overwhelmed by this. And then when I told
Yeah.
them a little bit more about the context, I chose to share it after they'd seen it, because I thought, I wonder how that might change
Mm,
something. And so yeah, like
mm.
how did you decide to come across this quotation, and how might it inflect those conversations across time?
I mean, I think it relates so much to I was thinking also about that font in St. James's, which is part of why I chose these particular ones with this quote, because of the history of abolitionists at St. James. And I'd been one of my early experiences and visits to St. James was a recognition of baptism. Um, and I think you were launching like a series of paintings that are
Yes,
in
by
the,
Che
the
Lovelace. That's right.
yes,
Or Kwabna
yes.
Araba Kuguano for the
So I wanted to
250th.
continue that conversation.
Thank you. That's so wonderful.
Exactly. So
So
I
when
wanted to have a continuation of that conversation.
I'm curious
And
about oh,
I
sorry,
think
we're speaking over each other now. I'm sorry.
no,
Like, right. The
no worries. I
it
think
would
there's a
be
slight delay.
it would be great to know where you hope that conversation might go. What you're imagining in the continuity, I suppose, between these abolitionist voices and your practice.
I think it's a continuation between like Mary's song, the abolitionists, my practice, and hopefully both the spiritual practice of people coming to pray and to visit the church. But in thinking about this, power concedes nothing without demand. We don't think about Mary demanding that God hear her. You know,
Yeah.
there's 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 been so much where I've been thinking about how um there'd been a prayer because she says God has heard us. That means you've demanded that freedom, you've demanded that um fullness of life experience. And then when it's been offered, you said yes. And so I wondered what it might mean for us to think about we need to make that demand on behalf of those who are most vulnerable in our societies today. Um, we need to hear that demand from those who demand us to work on their behalf and in solidarity for justice and to make our world a better place, not just for the strong and the powerful, many of whom will come through those doors too, but for those whose demands we are less inclined to listen to. Um, and yeah, I think for me, um, one of the reasons that abolitionists and liberatory theologians are so important is because I don't think that that work is done. And that's a constant challenge for myself. And so part of, why I think it's important that art is for me, my art is also a prayer, but why that prayer is in public is so that it might perhaps touch somebody else and encourage them in their work too.
Mm. Oh, thank you. I'm wondering about the Magnificat again in
Mm,
relation to what you've raised, because there's such a in this English translation, at least,
mm,
there's such a poetic turn of phrase where Mary sings that God scatters the proud in
mm,
the imagination of their hearts.
mm,
As an artist and as your full self made in the image of
mm,
God, that the proud are scattered in the imagination of their hearts. How
mm.
does that phrase strike you?
I mean, it's such a powerful phrase because I think so much of our consciousness, of our awareness of the world is it begins in our imagination, begins in our framing. And so this idea of, when you see yourself reflected in my works, it's not necessarily as you might think of yourself. Typically, it's a distorted image and a distorted imagination. And I really, it just resonates so powerfully because I think it strikes me that that is also the most important place to start. Um, yeah, to begin any work of change, to begin any work of liberation. I think it has to start in the heart. One of the phrases that I think of often too is um, the word diaspora, and that means to scatter. And I know those don't
Yeah.
necessarily always seem super related, but yeah, I think about how we're tempted by the world we live in to think of us as scattered from each other, which creates this pride, which creates this ego, which creates these identities that are not necessarily communal identities, are not necessarily identities that make us care about each other. They're separating and isolating. And so all those things sort of come up for me when I think about that phrase about the first place where God's love acts is to destroy those sort of isolating imaginations, is to destroy that sort of um, pride that is not to do with who we really and truly are. Yeah.
That visual theology
Mm,
and pulling together of the diasporic in relation to scripture and this text from Douglas and your experience as an artist and the the reflective quality of the medium that you choose and then the way that that relates to the application of color in all of its swirls and abstract possibilities. I hope that that really assists people to consider the relationship between power, diaspora, imagination, and to take account of themselves and perhaps the limits of imagination in relation to sometimes the the tensions, the injustices, the utter lack of belonging that comes from diasporic living in its many forms,
mm,
internally and externally. And
mhm,
so, just returning to these images, we've got a different angle so you can see more of those nativity figures in relation to your work, and that's the way with the cross in the center. That's just sort of its
mhm,
the way that you would normally see it on a weekday,
mm,
unless there was a Eucharistic service taking place there, which there is twice a week. And then this figure from the right of your diptych on its own with this beautiful little set of lights and reflections. I really love this photograph.
mhm.
And so, by way of conclusion, I would love to know if there's anything that you would like to share, anything that you want people to know, to understand, to hear, to experience, to consider what is precious to you to share with folks?
Big question. um,
Sorry.
I I think as we sort of get closer and closer, I mean, we're talking just before Christmas, so we're still in this Advent, in this expectation season. I hope that there is a joyful expectation in um, in those who encounter the work. I hope that joyful expectation is for their own lives, for who they are becoming, for flourishing of their souls, um, and that joyful expectation in what's possible um, when our imaginations are wider, when we encounter each other, when we care about each other, as we show so well in the season. Um, but I think it's not just for Christmas, but the final thing, I guess, for me is I've been really thinking about how um, Christmas is such an opportunity for renewal. There is a birthing of something new, and yeah, and even for people who might want to take away some of the smaller works, they're there as gifts. I hope that they are, yeah. Like fruits that they take away seed of these hopes, these expectations, and these widenings of imaginations for who we can all be to each other and to ourselves.
Mm, thank you. And the astonishment of the gift of God from within the holiness of Mary's womb, and the gift of God revealing God's self within and beyond God's own people for the whole of creation. I think of that when I think of your decision in a spirit of mutual care and in a spirit of imagination expansion to continually offer your work as gift in so many ways, and that does exactly as you've shared it does bring a very particular kind of generous interpretation of the potential of this season in Advent, in Christmas, and indeed in Epiphany. We were speaking about the
Mm.
Magi as well. I can think of no better way to mark the strange sacredness of this season than together with you and with your art. And so I really, on behalf of St. James, there is so much deep gratitude flowing towards you, and every blessing in this and every endeavor and in this conversation too. Thank you so much for today.
And to you, Amen. Thank you. Thank you.